we do things a little bit different on Good Friday. So basically, we're having a communion service. So my job this morning is to bring us to the cross, to focus our eyes on Jesus and to look past the cross to where we're going. It's the 9th hour. 3 hours ago, the sky went dark. It wasn't the darkness of a storm that was rolling in, because there were no clouds on the horizon. It was just darkness in the middle of the day. Sudden, unexpected darkness. The crowd is still there. They'd followed him there for a spectacle, basically, to witness a criminal being executed. Maybe a Friday morning entertainment for some of them. But then this inexplicable darkness. And nobody's laughing anymore. The soldiers are quieter than they should be. The mocking starting to change into something else. And in that darkness, they start to feel uncomfortable. And on the center cross, there were 3 crosses. And on the center cross, a man beaten beyond recognition. Nails through his hands and his feet. A crown of thorns on his head. Not just on his head, pressed and beaten into his head. And there was a sign put above his head, and it was written in 3 different languages, and it said, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." And when they put that on there, it was to mock him, because he didn't look like a king at this moment. And he's been hanging there since the 3rd hour. For 3 hours, while the darkness pressed in around him, he has been silent. This whole time, he has been silent. But now he speaks. And what he says hits the air like nothing ever has before. And this is what he says. He says, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani." My God, why have you forsaken me? That cry, my God, why have you forsaken me? You might recognize that as a quote from Psalm 22. And we can read past it too quickly because we're familiar with it. But stop for a moment. Like, really stop here and think about those words for a minute. Because what he's saying here is something that has never happened before in eternity. The Son separated from the Father. Now, I don't mean distant. I don't mean just quiet. Separated. Now, whether you believe that that was a literal separation or not, that's what Jesus experienced at that time. He felt the full force of that and the devastation of that separation. From before the foundations of the world, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit had been in perfect, unbroken communion. One. And now, on the cross, in this darkness, that communion is broken. And I don't mean that the Father stopped loving the Son. It was because The Son became something that the Father couldn't look at, and that was our sin. He who knew no sin became sin for us. Every lie ever told, every act of cruelty, every addiction, every betrayal, every evil thought you've ever had was laid on him. And the weight of it, the crushing weight of that echoes across all of history, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. Now, there is something you need to understand. He knew this was coming. This is not a surprise. He knew that this was the path before him. And we saw in the garden just hours before, and he's praying, and he's on his knees, and he's sweating so that it was like great drops of blood. He was in such distress in that garden. That was real. And he says to his Father, if there is any other way, because he knew what was coming, if there is any other way, let this cup pass before me. Because he knew what was in the cup. Not just the nails. It wasn't just the physical agony, even though that was bad enough. It was the weight that he knew he would have to carry. He knew about this moment, this darkness, this separation, and you know what? He drank that anyway. He drank the cup anyway. Nobody took his life from him. He said so himself, didn't he? He says, I lay my life down of my own accord. Nobody's taken my life from me. I'm choosing to lay it down. He could have called 10,000 angels to come and help him. And he could have walked away from that cross without a scratch, but he didn't. He stayed. For you and for me, he chose to stay. He knows you fully. Every part of you that you would rather that he didn't know, he knows. But he chose you anyway. That darkness that he entered, he did it so that you and I would never have to enter that darkness. That abandonment that he cried out from, you will never have to face. Because if he is yours, you will never be separated from him. He went there so you wouldn't have to, and that's not a small thing. That is everything, isn't it? The darkness is still thick. The crowd has become still. Something's different. And then he speaks again. He doesn't cry out this time. He asks a question. He doesn't ask a question, but he declares something, and this is what he declares. It is finished. Three words in English, it is finished. But in the Greek, in the original language, one word, tetelestai. It is finished. And if you were standing in that crowd, and just say you were a business person, a tradesperson, a shopkeeper, you would have understood exactly what that word meant. Because tetelestai was the word that you wrote across a certificate of debt when that debt had been paid in full. Tetelestai, written across the invoice. Not when it was partially paid or on a payment plan. They didn't write that until that debt was paid in full. Nobody could come back and demand payment again for that invoice. And that's the word that Jesus chose. He didn't say, I am finished. As if he was just dying. He said, it is finished. It is finished. As though something had been accomplished or completed. That's a whole different story, isn't it? Have you ever stopped to consider the importance of that one little word, it? It. Have you ever considered what it is referring to when he says it is finished? It's the debt. It is the debt that stood before you. Every sin, every failure, every time you fell short, that is it. The debt had been building for all of human history, and that is it. And in this moment, on this cross, in this darkness, Jesus paid it. All of it. The Apostle Paul would later write to the Colossians, having wiped out the handwriting of requirements. That's the certificate of debt. Right? Having wiped out the handwriting of requirements, which was against us, which we owed, which was contrary to us, Jesus has taken it out of the way because he nailed it to the cross. Your debt, my debt, nailed there with him to Telestai. Paid, finished, done. No accusation against you can stand. No voice in the darkness can hold that debt over you. They might try. Let me tell you 3 words to answer. It is finished. Because the one who had the authority to cancel the debt did. But do you know that he didn't just gasp those words? He didn't just whisper those words. In the original language, it tells us that he declared these words with intention and finality. That's not the words of a defeated man running out of strength. That's a man on a mission. In fact, that was the king completing his mission. It is finished. And then he bowed his head and he gave up his spirit. He's gone. The voice that spoke creation into existence, can you imagine, has gone. The hands that healed the blind and the lame, the heart that had compassion for the lost, stopped beating. It was still. And then the earth itself responds. Wouldn't you know it? Now, I don't mean it was a metaphor. It literally and physically and violently responded. Matthew uses the words, before he goes on to describe what happened, he uses a word, behold. Behold, like if someone says to you, like we don't use that word very often, but if someone says to us, behold, we're thinking, oh, wow, it must be pretty amazing. Behold, what's coming? And this is how Matthew saw what happened. He uses behold deliberately. Pay attention. Look at this. This matters. And Matthew goes on to say, the veil of the temple tore in two from top to bottom. The earth shook. The rocks split. And the tombs were opened. One moment, 4 events. 4 events. And each one of these events was the universe registering what had just happened on that cross. Let's take a look at each one of them. In the temple of Jerusalem, there was a curtain. Now, history tells us it was about 60 feet high, 30 feet wide, the width of a man's hand. It was thick. Thick. And it served one absolute purpose. It separated the outer courts of the temple from the most holy place. The innermost sanctuary, where that place where the presence of God dwelt, that curtain, that veil, was to separate. And it's been saying the same message for all these years. It said the same message. You cannot come in. You cannot come in. You cannot come uninvited. You cannot enter on your own merit. And let me tell you, that would have been every single person. Nobody could have entered in on their own merit. Once a year, only once, the high priest alone, he would pass through that veil after they'd followed a very precise ceremony of sacrifice and rites and cleansing and what they had to do, and he would enter in one day a year to make atonement for the sins of the people. Once a year, one man. With blood that was never really quite enough, because it was really just pointing to what we've just seen happen on the cross, wasn't it? Because the next year he would have to come back again, and then the next year he would have to come back again and do the same thing. And then Jesus died, and that curtain, that ancient, thick, 60-foot curtain, that separation tore, but it tore from the top to the bottom. Because if it tore from the bottom up, even though it was so thick, maybe they could come up with an explanation and say, that was a man thing. But from the top to the bottom, God did it. Because the final perfect, once-for-all sacrifice had just been made, and the way into his presence was now open. And it's still open. Forever. Not once a year, not through a priest, not with the blood of animals that could never really take away sin, but through Jesus, through his blood, through his finished work. And we read in the book of Hebrews, chapter 10, 19 to 22, these words. So therefore, brothers and sisters, since we have now got confidence to enter the most holy place, the presence of God, you should now have confidence through the blood of Jesus to enter past that veil into the presence of God. A new and living way opened for us through the curtain, the book of Hebrews says. That is his body. Because when that veil was torn, there was also a spear put into the side of Jesus' body. Let us draw near with confidence. The curtain is gone. You are not standing outside anymore. The next thing on Matthew's list, the ground shook. Rock split open. Creation itself was convulsing under the weight of what just happened. If you think about it, he was the Word of God, and he spoke this universe into existence. Not surprising that there would be a reaction. That old order, the world that had been held under the dominion of sin and death, since the garden, it was literally shaking apart. What sin had bound was beginning to come loose. What death had claimed as its territory, he was reclaiming it. I love that. This was not random or a coincidence. It was the first tremor of a resurrection that was coming. The earth felt it before the empty tomb could show it. And then we see the tombs opened. So Matthew tells us that after the resurrection, many of the saints who had died came out of their tombs and they appeared to people in the city. Death, the last enemy, was already losing its grip. Not completely yet. That will come on Sunday morning. But already, at the moment of his death, there was overflow. The power of death was cracking. The king had paid the price, and creation knew it. And the fourth thing on Matthew's list, the centurion. The last voice that you would expect was this centurion. Because he was a Roman soldier, a pagan, a man whose job it had been that day was to execute a criminal. He was to oversee what was going on. So he was just standing back, watching what was happening. He didn't have any skin in that game. And he had watched the darkness. and he had felt the earthquake, and he'd heard the cry, and he'd watched the moment of death, and there must have been something so different and so unique, so special in what had happened, that this pagan centurion said, truly, he had to be the Son of God. A pagan could see that. He wasn't a disciple. He wasn't a believer. He hadn't even been following Jesus. A soldier standing at the foot of the cross. The enemies of God could not silence the truth of who he was, even in death, even on the cross. Even in the darkest moment of human history, he was still unmistakably the Son of the living God. 4 signs, 1 moment, 1 message. Death has been defeated. The old is finished, the new has begun, the way is open, and death is losing. And the one on the cross, he's not staying there. He is not staying there because death can't hold him down. So stay with me a bit longer because I need to take you somewhere. Now that we've been to the cross and we felt the darkness, we've heard that cry of abandonment, we've heard tetelestai, it is finished. And we have watched the veil tear and the earth shake and death begin to lose its grip. And all of that is true and all of that is glorious. And we need to know it. And we should remember it. And we will remember it. But the cross is not the end of the story. It's not even the end of his story. If you want, close your eyes. If you want to. And we're going to go somewhere else entirely, somewhere that we've gone to in messages before, because I want to take you to the throne room. The Apostle John, the same John who stood at the foot of the cross and witnessed all this happening, that same John, near the end of his life, he's an old man by now, he was given a vision, exiled on the island of Patmos. You find this in the book of Revelation. And in that vision, he was taken into the throne room of heaven. And he saw something that undid him completely. He saw a scroll. And that scroll in the ancient world was a title deed. The title deed of all creation. Everything. God made everything. Sin stole everything. Death claimed. And a question ran out throughout heaven. This question. Who is worthy to open this scroll? Who is worthy to break the seals of this scroll? Who is worthy to take back what was lost? And John looked, and no one came forward. No one in heaven, no one on earth, no one in anywhere in all creation. Nobody was worthy. And John wept. He wept. He wept because if no one could open that scroll, if no one was worthy to take back the title deed of creation, then sin wins, death wins, and the enemy keeps what he stole, and we lose. And then one of the elders leaned toward John and said, "Do not weep. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah has triumphed. He is able to open the scroll. The Lion of Judah, the conquering king, the ruler of all rulers, the one prophesied from the very beginning, the seed of the woman who would crush the serpent's head." And John heard lion, so he turned to look for this lion, this king, expecting power, expecting majesty, expecting something that would make every enemy tremble. But what he saw stopped him completely. "And I saw in the midst of the throne a lamb, looking as if it had been slain, standing." Not a lion, a lamb, and the wounds were still visible. The marks of the cross were still there on the glorified, risen, reigning King of all creation. The wounds of Good Friday are still present. And I want you to understand what that means, because those wounds are not a reminder of weakness. They are the credentials of his victory. The very things that looked like defeat on Friday, the nails, the spear, the crown of thorns, they're the proof of his triumph. Aren't they? He didn't leave the cross behind him like he was going to forget about it. He carried it into glory. Because what happened on that cross is not a moment in history that has passed. It was the act that defines eternity. The lamb that was slain is the lion that reigns. But it's not one or the other. It's not one after the other. It's not one instead of the other. Simultaneously, they reign together, the lion and the lamb together forever. The suffering servant and the conquering king are the same person, and then John watches as this lamb, the scarred, risen lamb, he steps forward and he takes the scroll. And the moment he does, heaven just erupts. I could just imagine the scene. The 4 living creatures, they fall down in worship. The 24 elders, they fall down. They're casting their crowns and they're praising him. Then 10,000 times 10,000 angels start singing and praising him. And they're all singing this: worthy is the lamb that was slain to receive power and wealth and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and praise. And it doesn't stop there, as John says. And then I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and in the sea, every creature singing. To him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be praise and honor and glory and power forever and ever. Every creature, every voice, all of creation singing the same song. And this is where the bloody path leads. Not to a tomb, not to a religion. This bloody path leads to a throne and it leads to a king. To the moment when every knee bows and every tongue confesses that Jesus Christ is Lord. The one who hung in the darkness, crying out in abandonment, choosing the cross for you and for me, he's the one at the center of the throne in heaven, wearing his wounds like a crown. Holding the title deed of the earth in his scarred hands. So let me bring you back from the throne room and back to today, back to this room, to Good Friday. And I want to ask you something. Where are you standing now? I mean, not physically, but I mean in relation to what we've just talked about together. Where do you stand in all of that? Because here's what is true. Because of what happened on that cross, because of everything that that meant and represented, and because of who that lamb is, the darkness that he had entered so that you'd never have to do it. He went there so you'd never have to go there. The veil that tore, you imagine that veil that tore, you walk through freely. Every single day, not once a year, not through a priest, not with the blood of animals, through him, because of him, freely, always you get to do that. The debt that stood against you was cancelled, nailed to the cross, and paid in full. You're not standing outside anymore. You're not separated from God anymore, even though I know some of you will feel like you are at times, but that's just a feeling. Truth trumps feelings. You are not separated from God anymore. There is no curtain between you and the Father because the Son tore it down with his own body. And one day, one day. The same Jesus who hung on that cross, who cried out in the darkness, "It is finished." He rose again on the third day. You know one day he's coming back. Yes. Not as the suffering servant this time, but he'll be coming back as the Lion of Judah, as the King. And everything that sin took is all going to be restored. We haven't seen that happen yet, have we? Everything death touched will be made new, and every tear will be wiped away, and every injustice will be made right. Every broken thing will be healed, because the Lamb who was slain is worthy, and he holds the title deed of creation in his scarred hands, and he is not finished yet. The bloody path leads to a glorious future. And it's a future that is available to every single person in this room today. It's freely open, doesn't cost anything. But I need to say this clearly to you, it's not automatic. No, that's right. Yep. The veil tore, but you still have to choose to walk through it. That's your choice to walk through it. The debt was paid, but you still have to receive the gift. The path is open, but you still have to choose to take it. Jesus did everything. He left nothing undone. Tetelestai, finished. But he will not force you. He never has. He went to the cross willingly for you and me. He knew you fully, but he chose you anyway. And now the question that every Good Friday ultimately asks: what will you do with Jesus? What will you do with Jesus? If you've never stood at this cross and made it personal, not just some theological statement, but personal, today, what better day is there than Good Friday to walk through that open veil? There's no more appropriate moment than this one to say, yes, I receive what you did for me. I walk through the open veil. I come to the Father through you. I accept the gift. And if you've been walking with him for years, because somewhere along the way, the cross became a bit familiar, it happens. Because something you became it something that you know about rather than something that you are living in. And there is a difference to knowing about something intellectually and living inside the truth of something. There's a difference. So let today be the day that you stand here again in his presence. It is finished. Stand here as a person who was known fully and chosen anyway by a God who loved you enough to enter the darkness for you, to cry out in abandonment and to say, it is finished, and to rise and to take his place on the throne with the wounds still showing. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Worthy. We're going to share communion together, Douglas. And we're going to just get you to come up in your time and just take your communion and then just go in your time and eat the communion.